Great. So I'm going to give us a real quick orientation to the tool. Unfortunately, we can't do a how-to at this stage due to time restrictions, but as Catherine mentioned, we have instructional YouTube videos that will be up shortly, as well as a user guide that can really walk you through all the various input steps. So I just want to give people an overview of what the tool contains and hope get some any kind of questions we can have at the end. So a few things to orient yourselves. You start on the Getting Started page, and you note that there's a color key at the top. This is to indicate where the inputs go for Prep-It. Light yellow are drop-down menus and indicate selection there. The darker orange cells are where you input numbers or text. Gray cells are locked or reference data or calculations, and they usually cannot be edited. And green is just an additional color when you set something to yes. So you start by choosing your country. I have a fictional country here. There's a drop-down list with several countries listed. If the country you're working on is not in this list, you can just select other and still use the tool. The advantage of being on the list is there are some country-level default data that you'll see throughout the tool that you can use that is not available to countries not on the list. You'll notice throughout the tool that it'll say click here in various places. These are hyperlinks where you can record user notes or we'll give you other supports or guides or other directions to help you. So anytime it says click here, that indicates a hyperlink that you can assess. Okay, so the real function of this page is to think about all the different functionality of Prep-It that Catherine mentioned and to choose how you want to use the tool and thus guide you to the appropriate inputs. So you can see there's target setting, costs, impact, capacity, program monitoring, and forecasting. So I'm going to just choose for an example this first one, setting targets based on coverage. You should see in the navigation bar that certain inputs lit up. So these are the steps we need to take to achieve those functions. So hopefully that becomes clear. And then these have hyperlinks. So instead of navigating through the tabs on the bottom, you can use this navigation bar to get where you need to go. I'm going to choose a few different functions here and then walk through them, the necessary inputs. So now that I've chosen my functions, you'll see various inputs have been indicated here, as well as if you scroll below, you'll see the minimum data requirements and additional data entry that's optional, and that can help you get started in preparing to start using the tool. All right, I'm going to quickly move through these steps. Populations is where you specify the priority populations receiving PrEP in your program. And again, these can be selected from a drop-down list, or you can create a custom group and then type right over in column C, the orange bar. At least one priority population needs to be specified, but if you're not distinguishing between different types of clients or different groups, you can just specify one population and have it be all users. And then the acronyms in column C, they populate throughout the rest of the tool to help show you where to put your inputs. Continuation, Catherine mentioned the continuation curves, and you can see from these data points that we've entered here, that there are these corresponding curves that indicate how long people have been staying on PrEP after initiation. So you need at least one continuation curve in the tool, and there's space for up to 6 different ones. And then each priority population needs a curve assigned to them. Catherine mentioned that if you don't have this data available, you can use the continuation calculator. That's built in here. The results are here. This is tracking client level data over time in terms of their dates, their visit dates, and the drug supply they're having. So over time, you can track when they come in and how much drugs they have for a sample of your clients, and that will then generate these results. And there's, again, separate tutorials for all these different steps. Finally, we have the reference table of empirical studies if you want to use those to help estimate your continuation rates if you don't have that data otherwise available. Moving right along to initiation. This is where you track your monthly initiation information. And again, the minimum input here is in red. It's initiated prep, including reinitiations. And so those you can track each month. There's room for up to 5 years of monthly tracking. And that's the component that really ties into the other modules. However, there's also a lot of interesting metrics around initiation and the prep cascade that you can also track by month for program monitoring and evaluation purposes. So you indicate in this column here and this step here what data you're tracking, and then below it'll indicate where to put your data in with the orange cells. From that, you can click on the initiation results and see a lot of different measures summarizing prep cascade. And there are 2 graphs here. This is a nested cascade that can help you identify where program improvements might be made. A second cascade is where the denominators amongst those screened for prep. These graphs are dynamic, so you can look at it overall, or you can look at by priority population. Additionally, if you have multiple years, you can look at it by year. So that's just one of the outputs that you can look at. I'm going to move to capacity. Here, the minimum input is that if you already know your total monthly capacity, you enter it into cell C3, and that can link to the other modules in the tool. If you don't know your capacity and you want to calculate it, the rest of this worksheet is helping you do that by building up your capacity from service delivery units, which can be sites, clinics, hospitals, mobile teams, etc. And we're looking at elements of capacity around staffing, laboratory capacity, demand, meaning the number of potential clients per month or the number of people coming through the door asking for prep, as well as drug capacity, which is allocated from a national or regional level. And based on those inputs, you can get the capacity at each site, as well as the bottleneck. So what is preventing greater capacity to be delivered? And so there's a lot of outputs on this related to not only calculating the capacity, but also thinking about resource allocation and efficiency analysis and how to use the capacity that you do have most efficiently. Moving to Cost Lite. Cost Lite is the simpler of the 2 costing modules, but we really think that it's important to look at costs by visit. And so that's the sort of the distinctive approach that we've taken here. The first thing you need to do is set up a visit schedule. So starting with initiation, if one were to stay on prep for an entire year, when would these visits occur? So you can see I've set up 1 here. You can set up to 3 if perhaps there are different schedules for different populations. From then, you specify your monthly ARV costs, and then go into these costs by visit. And their costs are by initiation visit and continuation visit with the subcategories you see here. And again, we provide default values. These are based on analysis of 6 different costing studies with country-specific data used around salaries to help estimate to the best of our ability what these per visit costs would be in the particular country that was selected on that Getting Started page. From this data, then it yields the annual unit costs per person to stay on prep for an entire year, but also the cost per person initiated, and this is accounting for the continuation rates that were previously specified. Additionally, you can see how costs, monthly unit costs decrease over time the longer one stays on prep because of these more expensive initiation visits generally. I'm going to skip detailed costs for sake of time, but just to say that it does allow you to get much more fine-grained in your cost specification. It allows for task shifting analysis, and it has a lot of functionality for costing experts and people who are familiar with working in with that data. Targets. Okay, so for targets, Catherine mentioned there are 3 approaches. The first one, when you base targets based on coverage, you first need to estimate the number of potential users. And so in order to do that, we need to know about what's the population size, where are we delivering PrEP within the national population, HIV prevalence, and as well as the percent indicated for PrEP, meaning those eligible or those considered most at high risk for HIV. Again, we provide some country-specific default values that one can use, or if they have better values that they want to use, better data, then we encourage them to use the best data available. But there are some defaults in here to help with this particular input. One needs to specify their scale-up trends, how they're rolling out PrEP, when there's a few different shapes that one can use, as well as ways of manipulating the shapes to best represent the way they plan on scaling up. And at least one scale-up trend needs to be specified, and each priority population needs a scale-up trend assigned to it. And then we get into setting our target. I've set it here for option 1, and then setting the coverage. So based on the percent of potential users who will be taking PrEP at the end of the target setting period. So once we get to the end, what proportion of those users do we want to be taking PrEP? So you specify those here, and then you can see I've run the solver button, which generates these targets. It solves this equation of, based on the number of potential users, the continuation rates, and the scale-up trends, how many people do we need to initiate PrEP in order to reach that coverage level by the end of the target setting year? Option 2 looks at your capacity and helps you set coverage based on that instead. And option 3 is where you just manually enter them in, and therefore they can link to the other modules in the tool, like costs and impact, et cetera. So you can see, kind of do some more planning around that as well. I'm going to skip impact, but just to say that it's a fairly simple module. It doesn't require a lot of impact from the user, but it's an important output. We also have disaggregate targets, that if you want to take your targets and disaggregate them by age, sex, and sublocation, there's the functionality for that. And we're going to look at drug forecasting. This is assuming you've either put in your program data around initiations, or you've set some targets. Then you just simply specify the number of pills per client per day and the cost per pill, and it will give you these associated outputs around the number of pills required and its related costs. So you can see with this output is sort of bringing together already a couple of different modules to show you, what you can get out of PrEP. The rest of the outputs related to that are on the results dashboard. And there's a lot of information here. For time constraints, we can't go into all the details of them, but what we can do is we have here this results navigator. And this is really to show you, what are the questions that we can answer with PrEP, and then how do I find those answers? So generally, these are bringing together the inputs from cost, impact, and capacity with either your program data, what you've currently been implementing, or with your targets. So if we were to look at targets here, how much will it cost to achieve these targets? And what impact are we going to get for the money? We can go directly to table 1B to kind of see those answers there. And these have hyperlinks in them as well. Similarly, we can look at, what is the cost and cost effectiveness of providing PrEP to the different priority populations, and see these cost effectiveness comparisons. If we want to take more of an implementer's perspective, maybe we want to ask, how do our costs compare to the costs that we should be seeing based on the inputs we put in, and what is the projected impact of PrEP that we've already provided, which we could use for advocacy purposes. In terms of implementation, it's both retrospective and sort of what have we done, as well as prospective, thinking, okay, based on our current implementation trends, how many visits can I expect in the next 3 months? So we have data on that, as well as, given that, do we have any capacity concerns that are forthcoming in the immediate future? So there are other more detailed outputs related to costs, as well as results by month. So again, how many clients were estimated to be on PrEP in any given month? And that retrospectively and then prospectively, what are our expectations around how many clients will be there each month based on our targets, including both initiation and these continuation visits that can help with planning. There are a couple of other outputs specifically to disaggregating targets. You'll note here that these are not green or in bold. That's because on the Getting Started page, we did not select that disaggregate target function. So that's how you can tell whether or not an output table is relevant to you based on the inputs you made on the first page. So that was very quick, but that's what I could get done in 15 minutes. And I think we're just really excited to share this and get a lot of feedback from users. So I want to thank everyone, and I will now move on back to the presentation. So I'll hand it over to Cindy Matzi to talk about her experience using PrEP and eSwatini.